attack on Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza. It was crammed with doctors, patients, and large number of refugees. Hundreds of people have been injured and killed, according to Gaza officials. We should refrain from these comparisons between Islamic State or Al Qaeda or Hamas. Biden in Israel also promised to provide the country with everything it needed for self-defense. Dissenting voice within the United States were being stifled. The New York Times, which is generally seen more sympathetic to Israeli positions in its editorial stance. Notably, the newspaper also changed its headlines for the incident multiple times, which raised many eyebrows. Draconian siege on Gaza will now become a total closure, vowing, I quote, no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel, everything is closed, unquote. The unthinkable becomes acceptable when we deny people their humanity. We must fight to bring this devastating violence to an immediate end. Hello and welcome to New Wave Global. I'm back with updates on what is happening in Gaza and the huge human tragedy that is unfolding for so many days now. The latest horrific incident was the explosion or attack on Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza, where the footage has shown a massive explosion that ripped through the hospital, which I should emphasize is one of Haiti's leading medical centers. And it was crammed with doctors, patients, and large number of refugees who were basically finding a place to be safe from the Israeli airstrikes. And hundreds of people have been injured and killed, according to Gaza officials. And of course, Hamas blamed Israeli strike for the blast. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, said it was caused by a failed rocket launch by another militant Palestinian group, Islamic Jihad. And of course, that particular blame game fueled so much disinformation on social media, and in the fog of war, facts become the first casualty. So I'm just going to look at reports from The Guardian, Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera, and New York Times that have looked at the Ahli Arab Hospital explosion. And according to The Guardian, during a joint press conference in Tel Aviv with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, US President Biden, who was visiting, expressed sadness and outrage over an explosion at a hospital. And he appeared to accept Israel's assertion that the blast was caused by a failed Palestinian rocket. Biden also criticized Hamas, well, no surprises there, for its attack on October 7, describing it as a slaughter, and stating that Hamas was worse than the Islamic State for its actions. Now, many academics and other commentators and those who know history have said that we should refrain from these comparisons between Islamic State or Al Qaeda or Hamas, and for a variety of reasons. But anyway, that's the mainstream narrative that hits the media. And Biden in Israel also promised to provide the country with everything it needed for self-defense. Netanyahu obviously thanked the US for its support, and the Israeli military claimed that the explosion in the hospital was caused by a misfired rocket from inside Gaza, launched by Islamic Jihad, as I mentioned earlier, and not Israeli bombardment. And Gaza authorities reported a high death toll. About over 3,000 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip since Israel's retaliatory attacks began after October 7 attack by Hamas. The Guardian, of course, maintains an informative and balanced tone while it reports on this hospital tragedy. And, unlike other mainstream media outlets, especially in the West, that try to kind of lean more towards Israeli official narrative, papers like Guardian are far more independent and try to incorporate what we call the humanitarian aspect of reporting, which must not be forgotten in these terrible times. I will again refer to Democracy Now, led by Amy Goodman, that presented an interview with Rashid Khalidi, and their discussion centered around this hospital attack. With Israel denying responsibility, Palestinians accusing Israel, and attributing the explosion to Islamic Jihad. But the interview looked at the inconsistencies in Israel's claims, considering its history of targeting hospitals and schools. Khalidi criticized the US for its unwavering support for Israel, labeled the US stance as one sided, where Israel is portrayed as an absolutely good country, while Palestinians are absolute evil. He expressed concern that dissenting voice within the United States were being stifled, and the potential ramifications of the US's unwavering support for Israel in the ongoing conflict. And we have seen that, on campuses, on various universities, students and professors who don't toe the official line are being painted as supporters of terrorism or apologists of Hamas, etc., etc. While the reality is that there's a history to Palestine. I mean, and this conflict, it did not just emerge on October 7th or in 2023 or in 2020. It's been ongoing for 75 years, and that is something that we all must not forget. Similarly, Al Jazeera gave an in-depth account of the hospital blast, its tone, and the narration tried to explore and focus more on the facts, the death toll, and the reactions of world leaders and officials. However, the Al Jazeera has a huge following, but sadly, in Western countries, it is seen as a spokesperson of the Arabs. Now, that's a problem. It's not a problem with Al Jazeera, God forbid. It is a problem on how outlets outside global north, outside the Western world, are viewed with less, trust, or somehow you have to be Western and, from the Northern Hemisphere to be trustworthy and accurate, and all other things that are, all the other platitudes that are used for journalism. The New York Times, which is generally seen more sympathetic to Israeli positions in its editorial stance, has also faced criticism regarding its coverage of the Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza. Many critics have argued that the newspaper just regurgitates the official Israeli positions. And notably, the newspaper also changed its headlines for the incident multiple times, which raised many eyebrows. The initial headline of the article seemingly attributed the incident to Israel, but then it was altered later. The headline revisions have led to many questions about the editorial decision making and the commitment of New York Times to provide balanced coverage of events, including this conflict. And sadly, that is where we are, in a highly polarized, charged environment where the scope to have an independent point of view is very limited. But I was really encouraged this morning, today, which is 18th October, early morning. I saw a friend of mine, Professor Zila Eisenstein, send me this call by the Jewish Voice for Peace. And it's a very cogent, brief statement that calls on President Biden to demand and facilitate an immediate ceasefire. And they say that Biden administration must also refrain from sending any more weapons to the Israeli government. The Jewish Voice for Peace says, we mourn for the Palestinian and Israeli civilians killed, and we continue to fight with everything we have for the living. There is no justification, the statement adds, in international law for the targeting of civilians or holding of civilian hostages. That was true when Hamas attacked Israeli civilians. We must apply that same standard to the Israeli military as it subjects a captive population in Gaza to a massive aerial bombardment, targeting hospitals, using white phosphorus, and forcing 1.1 million people to flee south, while bombing both the designated evacuation routes and the southern Gaza Strip. The statement by Jewish Voice for Peace adds the Israeli government is threatening to commit genocide against Palestinians and denying their humanity. It's a very strong statement you must uh, be noting. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu asserted, "What we will do to our enemies will reverberate for generations." The Israeli Minister of Defense called Palestinians human animals, announced that the 16-year long draconian siege on Gaza will now become a total closure, vowing, I quote, "No electricity, no food, no water, no fuel, everything is closed," unquote. And the Jewish Voice for Peace says there are over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. Without intervention, this catastrophe threatens to become unimaginably more devastating. The unthinkable becomes acceptable when we deny people their humanity. We must fight to bring this devastating violence to an immediate end. And I think I will stop here because it is such a powerful statement. I totally endorse it. And I hope that many other people sign it and send it to President Biden. And I think there are so many voices of sanity in Israel, in the US, in the Western world, and of course in the global South that we must pay heed to and avoid this jingoism, this dehumanization of people that is happening on both sides. Because ultimately, if this conflict continues, the biggest casualty will be civilians, as we are noticing in the recent events, which are tragic but avoidable. Thank you.